how significant was this short-term boost for Netanyahu following the detainee release and ceasefire exchange?
Of course, it is very significant, Rehan, because Netanyahu, a lot of people thought, including even myself, that the cessation of hostilities and the halting of the war will be the end, the immediate end of Netanyahu, maybe. But it appears that he has a chameleon-like.
Yeah, he's notorious for that, isn't he? Being able to
Yeah,
shift.
yeah, to shift his shapes and forms and colors very frequently, and always to always portray himself as the triumphant figure in the midst of any event. Any normal prime minister after October 7th immediately should have been immediately removed from office, for example. But now, 2 years on, and 1,000 more Israelis died in the war, yet Netanyahu retains his popularity amongst certain segments of Israeli society. And you know who helped him maintain that popularity, Raham, as of recently? President Trump, by visiting the Knesset and hailing Netanyahu as a war hero, a victorious leader, and a true champion of the interests of the state of Israel. Even President Trump went as far as to meddle in the affairs of Israeli politics and request that President Herzog issue Netanyahu a pardon on account of his corruption charges and his corruption trial.
Do you think Herzog is going to listen to this request?
I hope he doesn't. Let's just say that. And I think that no one was taking that really seriously. But it seems that President Trump, anyway, does not really care much for the rule of law, even in his own country. So it doesn't matter at this point. But what matters is Netanyahu's numbers in the polls are increasing, unfortunately, not substantially, but at least it is enough for him to maintain his position as the leader of the Likud party, thus the prime minister, and continue his term to its end, which ends in next year. So it's still we are a few months. We have a few months ahead of us of more Netanyahu governance. And of course, in my opinion, Raham, this jeopardizes the entire peace process, unfortunately, because as we can see right now what the Israelis are doing, one day after the signing of the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement and the visit of President Trump to the region, both to Israel and Egypt, and the very positive development that took place yesterday, Israel again is violating the agreement one day after its signing by all the guarantors, by killing about 9 Palestinians today and by delaying the opening of the Rafah border crossing. So as you can see, this is the problem with the continued existence of Netanyahu. However, of course, this popularity is not sustainable in my opinion. At some point it will be diminished when the question of accountability comes up once more for the events of October 7th, especially if the ceasefire holds and the peace deal is implemented. The questions will arise that Israeli populace will wake up from the euphoria of the war and this quote-unquote victory, fake victory in my opinion, in this war, and then they will start asking questions. And the only way by which Netanyahu will evade these questions is by attempting to either ruin the Gaza truce or pick up a fight somewhere else in the region. The only guarantee we have against that is President Trump's eagerness so far to maintain the calm in the region and to not allow the region to descend once more into chaos and conflict.
Well, as you said there, that he has a slight uptick when it comes to the Likud party, but there's also a lot of distrust among the Israeli public in general. Now, do you think that the resentment over what happened on October 7th still may outweigh the current optimism and the current, pomp that he's projecting about the idea of, we've won and we've reached our objectives?
You see, Rehab, more and more reports are coming out that show the complete incompetence and security failure on the October 7th. And even there are very, very, very hints, very, very subtle hints in some reports about even collusion, in what happened. Maybe the Israeli right wanted this to happen. Maybe Netanyahu wanted this to happen in order to ensure his political survival. Because let's not forget, Reham, before October 7th, Netanyahu's government was on the verge of collapse. And the Israeli public was polarized and divided. The streets were flooded with anti-government demonstrations unprecedented in Israeli history. And he, in turn, was going for an authoritarian grab in order to diminish and hijack the powers of the Israeli Supreme Court. So as you can see, Raham, this was happening, and suddenly October 7th happens and makes him a war leader, and everyone has to stand behind him. So I'm not saying that he had anything to do with it, but I'm saying that there are reports that question why was the Israeli army of occupation very late to respond. 6 hours it took them to respond to the Hamas and the other Palestinian factions crossing the border, and even how the Israeli army activated the Hannibal Doctrine and killed many of the Israelis who died on the October 7th, especially civilians who were bombarded with Israeli tanks and Israeli helicopters so that they wouldn't be taken hostage. So as you can see, Reham, people will start asking questions and will demand accountability. So therefore, Netanyahu is trying to push forward the narrative of victory. And at the same time, whenever he speaks Hebrew, he says the war is not over. Whenever he speaks English, he says the war is over. Because he always wants to give the impression to the Israelis that we are under an imminent threat and you need to be united behind me so that we can eliminate all of our foes. And whether he likes it or not, whatever he accomplished in this war of genocide, whether in Gaza or the extended wars he fought against Iran and Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, he did score a few successes. I would agree with that. But by no means did he claim an ultimate victory, because Iran did not disappear. Iran is still a country in the Middle East and still hates Israel's guts. Hamas is there despite 2 years of genocide in Gaza. Even though Hamas has been weakened, yet he failed to dismantle them entirely, and he failed to return the Israeli detainees by force. And even Hezbollah, even though they were defeated, but they still exist and they refuse to completely disarm. So as you can see, it's not a complete victory, Reham, if we can even call it a victory. And the Israeli public will not buy that for long. The Israeli left hates Netanyahu. There are tens, scores of detainees and hostages died in captivity, including the 28 bodies or 24 bodies that are still to be retrieved. Those died mostly by Israel's indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza. So their families will still seek accountability on account of, again, Netanyahu completely disregarding the lives of his own citizens who were held detained in the Gaza Strip. So as you can see, Reham, whatever popularity he has going for him right now, it will not go on for long unless he ignites another war.
Well, as you said there, sir, that there's a lot of internal pressure. It's a multi-front war for Netanyahu to survive, basically. One of those fronts is Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. How serious do you think their threats are to quit the coalition if Netanyahu concedes too much in the ceasefire framework, given the actions that, for instance, Ben-Gvir had taken today of storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, again, very extremely far-right in nature?
You see, here I will do something that I'm not very fond of doing, Raham, but bear with me. I will speculate a little bit, because Ben-Gvir and Smotrich should have been out of the government by now with what has been achieved, with the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, with Israel agreeing in a written document, in a written agreement. They signed on a document ending the war. And this that was far right clearly said, whether Smotrich's National Religious Zionist Party or the Utmiz Yahudit party of Ben-Gvir, they said that we're out of the government, we're walking out if there's a definitive end or we commit to the end of the war. Yet they did. So far, they did not withdraw from the government. And in the Knesset, when President Trump was in attendance, Prime Minister Netanyahu was sitting there by his side, where Israel Katz, his Minister of Defense, and by his side also immediately Bezalel Smotrich and the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. And they were very happy and ecstatic, and they were applauding President Trump, and they did not seem to be upset at all. And so far, they have stopped even criticizing the release of the detainees. They have stopped criticizing their government that they are a part of for stopping the war in Gaza. So what I fear, Reham, that they must have been given some sort of guarantees by Netanyahu, or maybe even by the Americans, that they will get concessions elsewhere.
So you think they're positioning themselves basically as a far-right movement or a group for ideological reasons, or are they positioning themselves for possibly the next elections or promises of, the idea of a greater Israel, as they've named it?
I think they do have some promises that they will get to grab more land eventually, maybe in the West Bank, because let's not forget, President Trump said that Israel will not annex the West Bank. However, he never specified what the West Bank is, because Israel does not consider its settlements in the West Bank the West Bank. It considers them to be Israel. And the moment Israel decides to declare official sovereignty on these settlements, basically it will be a de facto, or not even a de facto, a de jure, even de facto and de jure annexation of these settlements. This means that very significant parts of the West Bank would be automatically, maybe about 70 or 80% would be annexed by Israel. So as you can see, there are loopholes that they might take advantage of. And I'm afraid, and this is just a speculation, this is not based on any sources that I've read or heard, but I do fear that being fair and Smotrich, whose focus, by the way, is mainly on the West Bank, which they term as the Judea and Samaria, because of it has a biblical significance, this piece of land. They might have been promised that they might be allowed to expand settlements, and they are expanding settlements as we speak, and maybe even annex parts of the West Bank. Maybe this was the concession given to the far right in order for them to stay in the government. Or maybe even they were promised that maybe Israel will relaunch the war at a later stage against Gaza, maybe a few weeks or a few months from now, because they will find any loophole to obstruct the agreement. And Israel is already doing that as we speak. I think we will get past this. This will not happen in the near future, but in the medium future, maybe in a few months or a few weeks even, if the United States does not keep up the pressure on the Israelis to prevent them from violating the agreement, we might find ourselves back in square one in Gaza, Rehan.
So, assuming that there is no actual deal, and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich actually do pull out from the government, what immediate actions or things may happen? Could this mean a snap election, or will Netanyahu again try to survive and cause some sort of reshuffle within the government?
I think if both parties, especially Smotrich, if he withdraws, Netanyahu's government is done. Yair Lapid did say before that he is ready to offer Netanyahu a backup, and that he will replace them by joining the coalition with Netanyahu. However, of course, we know that they are stark enemies. Netanyahu does not want to have any business to do with Yair Lapid. He does not trust Yair Lapid, and neither does Yair Lapid trust Netanyahu. So he cannot find a partner in Yair Lapid, for example, or in Lieberman, or any other political Israeli leader or leader of political party who can help him out in maintaining his coalition. So he might even call for a snap election in case this happens. However, believe it or not, Reham, I believe that the withdrawal of the Israeli right from the government is unlikely at this point, because the Israeli far right, for the first time, are being included in such an expanded manner in the Israeli government. Let's not forget that before that, those fanatics never had a place in the Israeli government and were always marginal figures in the Israeli Knesset. Netanyahu is the one who brought them to the center of Israeli politics by creating a coalition with them in order to establish some sort of a stable government. And Netanyahu, as you know, is not a religious guy. He's not an ideological guy. He's a Machiavellian person. He's completely aideological. He's completely interest-driven, a textbook political animal. So he basically rebranded himself entirely into a far-right fanatic in order to appeal to this segment of Israeli society. And it seems that they support him, and they do command a big portion of Israel's public opinion, not the majority, but a very significant portion. And the Likud party itself, which is supposed to be a right, a center right or a right wing party, not an ultra right wing party, and it is a secular party, is growing more and more extremist by the day, and is getting more and more affected by these extremist nationalist ideas, unfortunately. And Israeli society itself is growing increasingly more nationalist and much less peace-loving. Most of Israeli society, for example, rejects the two-state solution. So this is a conundrum that we will have to deal with. And I think that we should not put a lot of faith in the Israeli political class in general, or in the Israeli public, because it does not seem that this country actually wants peace.
Well, as you said there, Netanyahu, again, he's a very good shapeshifter, and he's tied his fate to this coalition that involves the right-wing allies. Now, given the extent of this ties between this right-wing coalition, does it affect Netanyahu if their positions within the polls in the next few weeks is not favorable?
Of course it will. Of course, if his poll approval ratings start declining once more, and this is expected unless something dramatic happens, he will have a problem. And the Netanyahu government, if this agreement holds and goes on for a long while and endures, Netanyahu will be under huge public pressure to resign. Because the only reason most of Israeli society, or a huge portion of Israeli society, is suffering Netanyahu and tolerating Netanyahu is because of the state of war that the country is in. Once this state of war ceases to exist and the political life of Israel starts going back to normal, they will demand accountability, as I said, Rehan. And maybe then his coalition government might even collapse, or even some of his coalition partners might find it that it is very toxic for them and for the political record and standing among the Israeli electorate to associate themselves with someone like Netanyahu, or even his own party might move to impeach him and replace him with another prime minister from inside the Likud party. This is a parliamentary system, so replacing a prime minister without an overall change in government, is not impossible, by the way. And it did happen numerous times in Israel in many parliamentary states before. So the idea that Netanyahu is standing in completely solid grounds are wrong. But for the time being, he is standing on relatively solid ground. Let's just put it like that.